Welcome to another edition of the RotoWire College Football Podcast. It is Thursday, November 5th. Week 10 is nearly upon us. Nick Whalen, joined as always by RotoWire's lead college football editor, John McKechnie, the Sammy Strouder of college football editors. Yeah, I had to dig deep for that one.
Big praise.
I went back and looked at some leaderboards. I felt like the last couple of weeks I've been slacking a bit on the comparisons, but
I don't know. No, I think you've still had your A game, but I mean that's
like
a particularly strong one too this week.
Yeah, one of these days I'll compile a list of guys who I was fully convinced were going to be the next Jerry Rice or the next Jim Brown, and just never quite ended up panning out. Like back in that day, like Sammy Strouder was playing when we were in like 7th grade, maybe 6th grade even. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you're not really looking at it from an NFL perspective. It's just like whoever's good in college, they're automatically going to be good in the pros. So I was routinely getting my heart broken. Yeah, right. It's like, why is Pat White not going number 1 overall?
What's the deal? What is the conspiracy behind this?
Mario Williams guy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I want to start with the MAC. That was back in a big way last night. And obviously, I think I'm almost contractually obligated to say something along the lines of, I don't think anything else is going on in the country, so we might as well talk college football.
Especially in the Midwest.
Yeah, right. But honestly, last night around like 8 p.m., my Twitter timeline was about 60% MAC tweets, 40% election tweets, which given the circumstances, I thought was about the ratio I was looking for.
That's a great ratio. I think we should all aspire to have a timeline with that buttoned up to where the political stuff it takes its bow when Ohio and Central Michigan are duking it out the way that they did last night. So I'm glad that your timeline was crisp. And I thought that, just Maction delivered, and it was like a huge trend on Twitter. Like, it was a lot of fun to follow along, and a lot of people were diving in. There was a lot of good, interesting, exciting football going on. We got Akron starting things off with an onside kick. Akron, the worst team in college football last year, like worse than Massachusetts, which is saying a lot. They look like they haven't gone anywhere since then. So that was tough. Nice little 58-13 loss at home to get a reality check to start things off. But, otherwise around the league, Jared Patterson is kind of considered the best player in the MAC as far as his, like fantasy is concerned, at least. Mm-hmm. And, he picked up right where he left off. It looked like Western Michigan's going to have a really fun offense this year. Again, Akron, not the toughest challenge. Ohio will have an interesting quarterback battle. Amari Rogers, the former UNLV quarterback, versus Curtis Rourke, the brother of Nathan Rourke, who's been running it at Ohio for a few years now. Looks like Jim McElwain's got the boys going at Central Michigan. So, I mean, he's pretty far away from Sharks, so he can really focus on coaching. And, those are kind of my biggest takeaways from week 1 of MAC.
Yeah, I mean, we had 3 one-score games. There were 5 games going on, or 6 games, simultaneously last night. And 3 of them were one-score games, and the other ones were all just like peak Maction type of games. There's just a certain type of football that's being played. Like you said, I think Akron beginning not only the game, but beginning the season with an onside kick is probably the best thing that's happened in college football thus far this year.
Yeah.
And the bar is set relatively low compared to other years, but still. And then I believe, was it the Ball State Miami game that essentially ended on like one of the worst interceptions in terms of decision making that you're ever going to see?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was a mess too. So, I mean, there's the requisite amount of sloppiness that you need and just messiness from the Maction that was also provided, thankfully.
So we're hoping to get a little bit less sloppy with the Pac-12 back this weekend. Washington and Cal has already been postponed, so not like the super hot start maybe that the Pac-12 was looking for, and encountering a lot of the same issues that the Big Ten has encountered, and we'll get to that in a little bit, especially my alma mater of Wisconsin, whose season is suddenly looking like it might be in jeopardy after a second straight cancellation. But we get Arizona State, USC, Arizona, Utah, UCLA, Colorado, Stanford, Oregon, and Washington State at Oregon State. I think Stanford, Oregon is probably the headliner, unless you're a Herm guy. You want to see how they fare at USC. Those will be the 2 Pac-12 games I think I'll have my eye on Saturday.
You definitely have it with the Arizona State USC. That's going to be a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of whereas a lot of the other parts of the conference have a lot of guys that left, and there's a lot of like rebuilding going on. I mean, you look at Oregon, they don't have Justin Herbert anymore. What does this offense look like under Tyler Shue? You got Utah. We'll get to them a little bit more later. Obviously, like the class of the Pac-12 last year, up until the very end, but by Bill Connolly's metrics, they rank 130th out of 130 in returning production. That's going to be a lot to overcome this year, and especially on defense, because they really were able to ride their defense and then have Tyler Huntley and Zach Moss just kind of bully everyone else whenever they had the ball on offense. I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that this time around with all the guys that they need to replace all over the field. So I think Arizona-Utah game has some sneaky watchability to it. And then, yes, I think Arizona State USC is the best one. And then I love that Washington State, Oregon State's the nightcap. That's the one where reality is you're rifting off from it, and then you got some good action going on in Corvallis. So I'm looking forward to that one especially.
I know we're 10 weeks in at this point, but I'm still in the like any football is good football mood. Like I don't care what game is on. I'm not turned off by that whatsoever. Like just the fact that we have college football based on where we were a couple of months ago, I'm still just kind of reveling in that. Yes,
me too. Like even like the lowest end of the Mountain West games, I'm like, yeah, no, that's definitely on like my when I flipped to the previous channel, like that it's there, it's ready for me.
So we hinted at the COVID issues around the Big Ten. Wisconsin is clearly the headliner there. They were cowards and got out of that game against Nebraska last week.
Yeah, that's right.
Clearly it was all a ruse, and they just didn't want to play Nebraska.
They would have done it if Nebraska was sick. Yeah.
Exactly. And now they're pulling the same load of crap again at home against Purdue. They're running from Nebraska. They're running from Purdue. The Michigan game as of next week apparently still on. We'll see. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, if Wisconsin were to cancel one more game, they could still play out however many games they can, but they would then be ineligible for the Big Ten championship game.
The only way that wouldn't be the case would be if everyone else also played 6 or fewer games. That is basically the last hope possible.
Okay, well, Nebraska's going to play 15 games, so we could rule that out.
I love their like rogueness. Like they're just like, yeah, we tried to play UT Chattanooga. They tried to play Central Arkansas. I feel like at one point they've just been loud, rambunctious. I don't even know how to describe.
Okay, and it would be one thing. It'd be one thing if they were Ohio State or a team that like really has a lot at stake. Like, what do you think is going to happen this year? Like, what is the best case scenario? Like, you go like 6-3. I don't know. I had a hard time wrapping my head around. I was just confused. I mean, like even if that game was played, they were probably going to lose.
And they already had the reality check. Like they already got smoked by Ohio State. Like what more do you really need to know?
Game, right? Had they won that game, then maybe you start to see a path and you could understand the excitement. But it's just like why do you just need to play football to lose by 3 touchdowns?
Spend Monday through Friday, talking about how the program's right back on the right track, and then get smoked by Big Ten West team X, and just restart the cycle on Monday like nothing else happened.
I saw that was actually a pretty good loss takes about that Ohio State game, which as a reminder, just to refresh your mind, was 52-17. And I guess that's where Nebraska is at this point, where you can take solace in only losing by 5 touchdowns.
Right, and there is that article that I quote tweeted from the week leading up to that game, where it's like how about Ohio State, starts to have a respectful relationship with Nebraska? It's like why would they bother even noticing you guys, let alone have some sort of respect? Like
what does that
Penn State
even mean?
has earned their respect.
The score up? Yeah, right. So Minnesota will be without its defensive coordinator this week. Was
he there last week?
Yeah, where somebody had to say it. And this might be a good thing. I think that's the other line that I have to sneak in there. After allowing, was it 45 to Maryland last week? Not a huge loss for Minnesota, possibly a gain. They're favored by 7 at Illinois. So there's still some belief in that program, but I got to say, I don't know a ton about Minnesota's defensive coordinator personally, but we can spend a minute just on the state of the program. I mean, I think we both kind of like them to beat Michigan a couple weeks ago. That game goes completely off the rails. And then people start to think, well, maybe Michigan's really good, and that's not that bad of a loss. And then Michigan, gets beat pretty handily by what we thought might be like the worst team in the entire Big Ten in Michigan State. And suddenly that Minnesota loss looks terrible. Then you add on top of that a loss to Maryland, and all of a sudden this is going completely off the rails.
Like if you try to do like the transitive property map for wins for the Big Ten right now, it's absolutely absurd. And I think it ends with like Ohio State and Northwestern being the best teams by a long shot or something like that. Because you got a Minnesota team that's lost twice, both to teams that have gotten blown out in their other games by bad teams or at least mediocre teams. So, I mean, you can really twist your mind into a pretzel trying to like figure out what it all means in the Big Ten so far. I mean, we know for sure that Ohio State is Ohio State. We know that Indiana will be feisty and might be able to finish like third in the East or something like that. I think it's been a really tough start for Penn State on the other side of it, but there's so many other just unknowns around this league right now where once you get past that elite tier, it's hard to really know what you're going to get on a given week or in a given matchup. So yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And when it comes to Minnesota, it just feels like there's something missing there. Defense, obviously, I mean, they're giving up huge runs all over the place. The offense is still putting up some numbers. I thought the running game is particularly impressive. Mo Ibrahim is pretty awesome, it appears. Rashad Bateman's still good. He didn't get enough targets last weekend. But, yeah, if you're Minnesota, it doesn't feel like you're building off of last year at all. And I think that was what you wanted more than anything from this season. So I think we're off to a very tough start in that regard if you're a Minnesota fan.
Yeah, defense has certainly been the issue. The offense struggled a little bit against Michigan, but that was not the problem against Maryland, to say the least. Speaking of Michigan, a weekly contender for the Who's Back Bowl, and took a major step back, especially given the opportunity that some of this COVID stuff might open up for them. To lose this game was inexcusable. I mean, I think if you would have told Michigan that you would go into this game, you would lose, but you would win the time of possession battle pretty handily. You'd have no turnovers. Joe Milton would throw for 300 yards. You would rush for 150 as a team, not great, but 3 rushing touchdowns as a team. I think you would just wonder how it happened, and I feel like that's kind of where we're left. This seems like one of those games where it would just have to be a disaster scenario for Michigan, where there's just some sort of breakdown. You have some kind of, I'm thinking like that Rams-Dolphins game last week, where like all of the metrics say the Rams were the better team, but when you have 80-yard fumble touchdowns and you're fumbling on the 1-yard line, like the game just has a way of getting away from you. And that's not like Michigan just straight up got outplayed. It was just a really weird game, and it just felt like a slow bleed out till the end. And obviously they only lose by 3, but this is a game where you can't lose by any amount. There's no such thing as a good loss in this scenario.
No, I mean, Rutgers is a team Michigan State was coming off a team that had just lost to Rutgers the week before. I mean, that is, about as bad as it gets in the Big Ten. And for Michigan, who just kind of manhandled Minnesota, to come out the next week at home, I know that it's not like the big house is packed or anything, but still, you're at home. You got just a wounded animal in Michigan State, and you still can't take care of him. And the Joe Milton 300 yards, it comes on 51 pass attempts. That on like
Michigan football
on a per pass. Yeah, I mean they're communists for throwing it more than 40 times. First of all, but then to be that just inefficient with it too. I mean that's just Gerald Ford is rolling in his grave, I guess, when it comes to that sort of performance from Michigan. But yeah, to your point, like they just kind of got beat. They didn't have anything really fluky go wrong to really decide this one. It was just Michigan State was better. The timeline was pretty fun during that game. A lot of just like what is happening right now, and a lot of the Michigan alums in journalism being very upset about what was happening. The Michigan State alums being very excited about what was happening. So made for a pretty fun little timeline there on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, Chad Henne would never. I just want to get that out there. Mike Hart would never. How about the Cincinnati Bearcats? 49-10 over Memphis. You were on Cincinnati. You've been on Cincinnati all year. It's heated up week to week. And all of a sudden, the Cincinnati Bearcats are undefeated and looking every bit the part of a top 10 team.
Yeah, so they're legit. Their defense is extremely legit. Not everybody could hold Memphis to 10 points, even though they don't have DeMonte Coxey anymore. That's still really, really impressive. And then I think Desmond Ridder is starting to heat up a lot. You got that run game cooking. Alec Pierce, their best receiver, got hurt during this game, but he was off to a really hot start before that happened. So they have a lot of ways that they can beat you. They can score with you, but they can also just totally keep you off the scoreboard. And I don't know if they're going to face anyone that can really push them as far as as needing Cincinnati to put up more than 30 points. I think their defense is just that legit. So they have the look of the best team in the group of five right now. I don't really see that changing at any point. They're just built extremely well top to bottom. Luke Fickell's done an awesome job there recruiting by group of five standards and getting in some power five transfers, stuff like that. So, yeah, I have a hard time seeing Cincinnati losing a game the rest of the way, and I think they're going to keep winning convincingly.
Clemson holds on for a win against Boston College. Obviously a lot closer than we expected. I think even without Trevor Lawrence, there was a belief, and that's indicated. I think Clemson's a 5-point favorite at Notre Dame without Trevor Lawrence this weekend. I don't think people thought they would struggle to the degree that they did, but this was one that, had a couple fluky plays. Like ETN fumbled at the 1 yard line. You just had some very un-Clemson-like plays throughout this game, but at the same time, like I was watching this with some friends, and we were like midway through the third quarter, like Clemson's winning this game. There was really never that much of a doubt. There were a couple moments where you kind of wondered, but I think Clemson has entered that zone and has probably been in that zone for a year or two now, where so many things have to go wrong for them to lose a game to an opponent this inferior.
Right. So, I mean, you compare this to back in 2017, I guess the last time that they lost a regular season game, it was against Syracuse. Yeah, it's just ridiculous
Crazy
to think about. But, that Kelly Bryant goes out in that game and they don't have a real answer. Is Zarek Cooper now at Jacksonville State, or Hunter Johnson, who basically just played his way out of the starting job at Northwestern a year ago. It's like Clemson they don't have those problems anymore. Like their backups are guys that could easily be starting for like any other program, and DJU is no exception. I mean, that guy is going to be a beast that whenever he takes over for Lawrence for good, they're in very good hands, of course. I mean, a guy that's like that big that can move the way he does with the cannon arm. Ridiculous. So, yeah, I think you and your boys had it right. Like, when BC couldn't come out in the third quarter and put any points on the board, like that's what you need to have happen. That's like the next ingredient if you're like following the steps on an upset of a juggernaut like that. You need to keep it rolling out of halftime, and they were unable to. And of course, they end up being shut out in the second half and losing by 6 points. So, they just couldn't keep it going. I do like the general direction that BC is going in. I think they were right to get rid of Adazio. I think that they made the right hire. But, bottom line, Clemson's still Clemson. But do you want to talk about, what that means for this weekend?
Well, first of all, I hope Adazio got a job at like TikTok or something after leaving Boston College.
He had like my favorite Vine ever. With just pointing and saying "dude," like that totally works.
Ultimate dude. Yeah, he had a whole series of them.
Those were tremendous. Mark Hurd's like "dude," and then he's at Colorado State now, and it looks like it's going to go terribly. I think this is going to be a short run for him, and I think that's probably it for him as far as head coaching jobs go.
Yeah, so you mentioned Clemson now going to Notre Dame this weekend. This feels like Notre Dame has been in this exact situation so many times over the last few years, and they've almost always come up short in these games. But this is yet again another major opportunity, even in a season that will ultimately maybe have some asterisks. I mean, when you're talking about Clemson being without the best player in the entire country, that certainly changes things. But in some ways, is it almost fair to say that this makes it a better game? Like, I love watching Trevor Lawrence. If you're Clemson, you obviously want him on the field. If you're ESPN broadcasting this game, you want him on the field. But I think with Trevor Lawrence, this ends up being one of those games where there's a lot of hype. Maybe it's close for a quarter, and then Clemson pulls away. I think with DJU under center, as good as he is, I still think that at least levels the playing field to the point where this could end up being a pretty competitive game, or at least a lot more competitive than maybe it would have.
Yes, absolutely. So this has been characterized, and rightfully so, as the toughest game on Clemson's schedule all year, and that's still obviously the case. I think if Lawrence is the quarterback, they're probably favored by like 13.5 on the road here. And that might even be like generous to Notre Dame, honestly. But with him being out, this does, like you say, level the playing field. And I think also that just Notre Dame, they match up in a way that's going to be an uncomfortable 3 to 4 hours for Clemson, no matter what. I think that Notre Dame just plays that brand of bully ball. If Ian Book has it going in terms of his passing ability, like he's been very inconsistent with that, that's going to be a huge factor. That was something that cost them in the playoff a couple of years ago, that and just not being able to contain Justin Ross and that Trevor Lawrence passing game back in Dallas in the 2018 playoff. But, I mean, this is still an Ian Book team. This is still a really tough defense. This is still an offensive line that looks like a Notre Dame offensive line, just really, really big and experienced across the front. Good run game. Those are just all, like, building blocks to this Notre Dame team that means you're going to have to just beat them with your pure athleticism and some of, like, the just pedigree advantages that you have elsewhere, because Notre Dame probably not beating itself in this one. So it's going to be tough. And, we won't have the full house to really give like DJU like the full experience of a tough road game against a really good team. But I think it's still going to set up as a very, challenging environment for him nonetheless, especially if the conditions are tough in the Midwest. Hopefully they won't be for our sakes. But I think this really does set up nicely. S&P Plus, Bill Connolly's system has Clemson winning this game by 1 point.
Interesting. So what was your scouting report on Uiagalelei after last week? It felt like a fairly conservative game plan. I mean, he did throw the ball 41 times, but wasn't exactly launching it downfield over and over. Do you think it gets to the point where maybe they have to turn him loose a little bit more this week?
It wouldn't surprise me, and they shouldn't have any reservations about doing that. I mean, he's got the physical tools to do it. I think they're going to be a little bit healthier at receiver this week. That's been a problem for them. The two sophomores that are 5 stars, Frank Ladson and Joe Nada, both of them have been banged up. I think both of them missed last week's game. So if both of those guys are back, in addition to Amari Rogers, that gives DJ Uiagalelei the weapons around him that I think will prove to be a lot better than they were a week ago with what he was working with. So that should help things. If they do need to turn it loose, they'll have some legitimate options in Nada and Ladson.
Have you heard any comps for Uiagalelei in terms of future NFL projection? I mean, he's huge at 6'4", 6'5", close to 250, moves fairly well. I mean, he's not Jared Lorenzen, but with the QB jacket on especially, I mean, he's a thick man.
Yeah, he is. He certainly is. I've heard like supersized Russell Wilson as one, but I mean that's about what you can come up with. I mean, he's got that crazy arm, and he's got like almost Ben Roethlisberger-ian size to him.
I think that's the only comp you can really make in terms of size, but obviously he doesn't move anything like Roethlisberger, especially current Roethlisberger.
No, not present day. Back in the day, Roethlisberger could move around and make things happen a little bit. I think the DJU probably a little more athletic now than even Roethlisberger was in his peak. But either way, I mean, this guy was a 5-star number 1 quarterback for a pretty good reason, as we can see, for him to come out and be trusted to throw 41 times and deliver the win in a tough kind of comeback situation. I think there was a quote where he said like, at halftime we were talking about it is like, 28 points. Like that's what Boston College had. Like that's not a lot of points. Like we're fine. So
it must be nice.
Yeah, right.
So I read this week that Uiagalelei, his favorite player growing up was Jeremiah Masoli, and he chose number 5 because he loved Reggie Bush. I think we'd get along great with this guy.
Yeah,
I think he'd just be one of the boys.
That would be amazing to have. I mean, like those are like just kind of like, if you say that, like that person is cool, like just right off the bat, exactly. Your like head like whips around and like I mean, the Masoli name drop, the being a Reggie Bush stan, those are two golden check marks in your permanent record. So this guy seems pretty awesome. That on top of the other quote, Clemson's on quite the run of finding their quarterbacks that are really cool.
Yeah, well, unless somebody gets Trevor Lawrence's take on Jeremiah Masoli, I think we have our future option here.
That's right.
I want to turn to Michigan and Indiana this week. So Michigan loses to what we believe maybe was the worst team in the Big Ten. They are still ranked 23rd. Some of the rankings continue to be a little bit laughable. You have Liberty at 25. There's, like we've talked about all year. Indiana's 13 for that matter.
Yeah,
They're 2-0. But Michigan's now on the road at Indiana again. Not your typical road environment. But the Wolverines are favored by 3.5, despite being ranked 10 spots lower. Are you expecting a bounce back?
This is a really tough one to figure out because, like, with Indiana, like they got up for their big game and they delivered the victory against Penn State. Then last week it didn't always look as comfortable. But you still felt like very strongly that they were going to be able to beat Rutgers. Like Michigan, we talked about them last week, and we were off them coming into the year, and then they dominate Minnesota. We don't really know what that meant yet at the time with how bad Minnesota ended up proving to be. So how impressive is it that they were able to bludgeon Minnesota? I don't know. And then they lose to Michigan State. So I don't know which Michigan shows up here. I think Indiana has enough on defense to, make this a little bit annoying once again for the Michigan offense in terms of a per play efficiency basis. So Indiana right now, I'll take them to win this game. I mean, I just think that Michigan is good, but not great. I don't think that they're going to have like that crazy talent advantage. I mean, they're closer, I think, to Indiana than Penn State was in terms of like who's on the field, Jimmy's and Joe's type of thing. And I think Indiana's better coached and playing better. So, I mean, those are all factors that make me say, like, let's go Hoosiers.
Please say Jimmy's and Joe's much more often. That brings me back to like my high school football coach. Like I absolutely love that kind of language. So if we could institute maybe like a over under 1.5 Jimmy's and Joe's per episode, that would be ideal.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll try to work it in without it feeling forced. But yeah, I mean, it felt good right there, especially when you're talking some Big Ten matchups. Jimmy's and Joe's, it makes sense.
Yes. All right, so we got BYU and Boise State tomorrow night on Friday. I think we need to start talking a little bit more about Zach Wilson, who, if you follow college football, he's kind of been building a name this year, and had a decent year as a sophomore, but coming back as a junior, completing 75% of his passes through 7 games, 19 touchdowns, only 2 picks, threat to run the ball as well. He's got 7 touchdowns. That's more than the previous 2 years combined. And we'll talk about Heisman odds in a little bit, but he's lurking. I mean, I don't think he's going to win it, but he's 4th behind Mac Jones, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, and he's tied with Kyle Trask at 33-1. So, I mean, based on what could happen with some of those top guys, I don't think that's the worst bet. But I'm more interested about how you view him or what you've heard about him as a potential NFL prospect. I mean, he, coming from a smaller school, especially BYU, you kind of have a certain reputation, but he has the size. He's 6'3", he's 215. Obviously, the numbers are there. I mean, is there a chance that he maybe ends up challenging a Trey Lance for that QB3 in the 2021 draft?
That's the important jumping off point. Like, I don't think that he's going to enter the Lawrence and Fields tier, but I think that we've seen that tier just completely close off. I don't think anyone is challenging that. So the next question is, what does 3 through 5 look like? I would argue that no quarterback has made himself more money this year than Zach Wilson. I mean, it's just been absolutely automatic from him. Like you said, completing like 75% of his passes at a crazy high YPA, the 19-2 touchdown to interceptions. That's insane. 11.1 YPA, really impressive to keep that up over the course of an entire season. Basically up until like Baker Mayfield's Heisman season, like quarterbacks weren't doing that over the course of an entire year. Now it's a little bit more commonplace to average over 10 yards per attempt, but still really difficult to pull off. If you watch the film, like he's very creative, like he can move around, extend the play. He's got all the arm strength and all the Mahomesian arm angles and stuff to kind of, he can flick it sidearm if the situation calls for it, and he can still get the ball down there. So, I mean, Richard Johnson works at ESPN, has been all over Wilson for a while, called him like the Mormon Manziel. So that's obviously huge praise, of course. But I mean, it fits. I think that this is a huge opportunity for him because it's Friday night, so this is clearly like the best game that's on, and Boise State looks like Boise State again. So really, BYU hasn't played anybody that impressive, and that's where you can find some holes in the production that Wilson has had.
Right.
But if he can produce the way he has been, but against a Boise State team that's really tough on the blue turf in Boise, then I think he kind of starts to really solidify himself as maybe the number 3 quarterback prospect in this class.
Yeah, Boise State's breaking out the black unis tomorrow as well, so that's another thing to keep an eye out for. I'm not sure how you
what are your thoughts on that? Like, what's the best Boise look? Because I think it's blue, wearing all blue on the blue field.
I agree. I do. So has the novelty worn off for you at all? Like, Boise State was definitely a really cool team to like, especially after they won the Fiesta Bowl. Like, a lot of guys our age, I feel like if you're playing NCAA football, you're like, I'm being Boise State. They're so cool. I don't know. They're not as cool as they used to be. I liked them better when they were the plucky underdog. They've gotten too good.
They have such a sweet setup right now. Like, basically short of getting a bid to join the Pac-12 or something, like this is as good as.
Would you even want that? Yeah, I mean, you know what it is? It's Gonzaga in college basketball. They have the greatest setup ever. Like, you play 2 hard games a year, you play in a couple tournaments early on, you automatically win your league, and you get a 1 or a 2 seed every year.
That's exactly right. And like, it's like they're not getting the recruits that Duke and Kentucky, for as far as like Gonzaga would be concerned. They're not getting those Bama or Clemson guys. But when it comes to like them recruiting against anyone else in the group of 5, like they have a huge advantage. It feels like, and yeah, they always get the guys. The development there, like the stability within that program seems to be so solid. They're not churning out new coaches like every 2-3 years or leaving the job. So that they've got just a rock solid foundation there, and it just seems to work. So yeah, it doesn't. Put it this way. Yeah, watching Boise State win is not like this like fun experience that it used to be. Like, they just bully people around, and they're usually a lot better than whoever it is that they're going against. So it's always very surprising when they slip up 1 to 2 times a year in the Mountain West.
All right, it's time to address the elephant in the room. Florida at Georgia. This one's being played neutral site at Fred Taylor Stadium in Jacksonville. Dogs are 3.5-point favorites. The total is 52.5. How are you feeling mentally?
Terrible.
Okay, good. You and I think, share a brain with this type of stuff. I always am just assuming the worst for a game like this.
Yep. And, Georgia has won this game 3 years in a row. In each of those 3 years, I've felt pretty strongly that Georgia was going to win going in. Obviously, 2017 was a blowout. 2018, kind of a blowout. Last year, a lot closer. I mean, this is a year where you have Kyle Trask versus Stetson Bennett. That's not good. We saw Georgia have one of the more like costly wins that you'll see in a college football game a week ago against Kentucky. Like, not only were they able to hang just 14 points on Kentucky, but they lost a lot of important players in the, up front. Jordan Davis, their star defensive tackle, he's got a messed up elbow now. They also had another senior defensive lineman go out. Richard LeCount got in an unfortunate dirt bike accident after the game. That's their safety. I thought.
You have to plan for 1 or 2 dirt bike accidents per year. If you're not doing that, that's on the coaching staff.
Yeah, we were due. Like, yeah, Georgia hadn't had any yet. So, I mean, that's usually usually we get that out of the way by September. So I blame delaying the season for this. But I thought was kind of like the ace in the hole that could have slowed down Kyle Pitts. So him being out, I think, is a massive, massive loss for the Georgia defense. So you basically have a game where Florida's offense isn't going to be held in check for 4 quarters against Georgia's defense, especially if Georgia's defense is banged up. So that calls into question, like, can Georgia put up enough points to keep pace with Florida? I would guess no. I know that's not a very good Florida defense. Todd Grantham always seems to allow drives to continue on 3rd down. Looked like Georgia's run game got back in gear a little bit last week. I think that's how they win this game. If like Zamir White and one of the other guys, James Cook or Kendall Milton, can really kind of dictate this game on the ground, and Georgia can play that brand of football, and keep Florida's offense off the field, then I think that's how they win it. I just don't see that happening over the course of this game. And at some point, Georgia will have to close a lead, and they won't be able to. And I think that will be a wrap. So I like Florida to win this game outright.
Okay, that was sound analysis, and that was not biased either. I feel like you laid out a good case. I understand your position, and if the Dogs win, then you're happy. If they're not, then you're correct.
Yep,
it's a great place to be.
The emotional hedge.
Yes, exactly. So let's get back to those Heisman odds before we look at the DFS slate. I'll read the top real quickly. Mac Jones is the leading Heisman candidate right now. This is according to OddsShark. He's at plus 125. Justin Fields, 150. Trevor Lawrence, 250. You got Trask and Wilson at 33-1. Devontae Smith, Najee Harris, both at 40. ETN at 50. De'Ara King and Kellen Mond at 66. Chuba at 80-1. And then you have David Bell and Sam Ehlinger at 100-1. I wouldn't say this is a bad field because you have Justin Fields, you have Trevor Lawrence. Those are guys who could win a Heisman in any year in college football.
Right.
You have Devontae Smith, you have Najee Harris. Like, the names are there, but if Mac Jones wins the Heisman, would he be the worst player to ever win the Heisman?
Man, I mean, like you're reaching like Eric Crouch territory or something, but like Eric Crouch was like legit that year that he won it. So maybe more like a Mark Ingram is like the apt one where it's just like we have to have a Heisman this year. And I guess this guy was the best, but you don't really feel like it's not a memorable one. So I mean, if Mac Jones ends up winning it basically on the basis of him having played more games than Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, then I mean, that's great. And I know that we've talked earlier in the season about like, well, Fields can't win it because Lawrence will have literally just played more games. Like, I know it's like a little bit hypocritical to like go back against that logic or whatever, but like if Mac Jones just gets it on like just compiling the stats, and it's not that hasn't been playing at an amazing level this year. He has, but it does feel like this would just be a very bleh Heisman if it ends up being Mac Jones.
Yeah, it would be very strange. I think just given the profile of the other two guys and the way that, like, Trevor Lawrence, I wouldn't say he was running away with it, but he was pretty comfortably in the lead before missing, what's going to be at least 2 games now with the COVID. And if he misses another game, I think maybe that's curtains for him, and that narrows the gap, assuming Justin Fields plays all of his games, and then that's just not a concern anymore. I don't think Mac Jones is going to win it. And I asked that question somewhat facetiously, but I think you are right. Mark Ingram's probably the worst player at the time to win it, and we're not talking like what happened afterwards. Like, obviously you could talk about RG3 and Manziel and all that, but as poorly as some of those NFL careers turned out, for the most part, it's hard to argue that the Heisman has gone to the wrong guy or has gone to someone who didn't at least have the numbers to deserve it.
Right. So just it's got to be Ingram, I guess, would be the only clear comparison. Because like you said, like those other Heisman seasons, regardless of how their pro careers went, like those were like memorable seasons. Like Mark Ingram, like the only thing I remember about that year was just Alabama being back. I mean, it wasn't like Ingram was just like part of the function of that. It wasn't Alabama's back because Mark Ingram. Right.
So he had 1658 rushing yards with 17 touchdowns. I want to fast forward to the year that a certain running back from Wisconsin, I believe, finished second. That was that 2012 or 2013 with Melvin Gordon? Maybe even later. Oh boy.
I think the 2014 season, right?
It was 14, yeah.
So that would be what the
2,587 yards, 29 touchdowns.
So almost 1,000 more yards.
And 12 more touchdowns. Finished second to Mariota.
Okay,
but at the same time, it was like Mariota deserved it.
Mm-hmm,
he was the man.
He did. So, I mean, it's tough. You have to do some crazy stuff to win it if you're not a quarterback anymore. And
go ahead.
I would consider that Gordon season crazy. He did along the way, like set the single game rushing record, only for Oklahoma to like scheme it up like a week or two later. Lame.
The 2 college football players who I will never forgive, Donnell Pumphrey, Samaje Perine. And Perine still bouncing around the NFL. I feel like I saw some team claim him or move him up the depth chart this past week.
He's on the Bengals with Joe Mixon, so it's just OU all over again.
I cringe every time I hear both of those guys' names. So going back to that 2009 Heisman voting, this was a brutal field, and it's pretty easy to understand why Ingram won it. And he only won it by 28 total points.
Oh.
He only had 5 more first-place votes than the second-place finisher, Toby Gerhart.
That was the year. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Putrid.
Yes. So it was Mark Ingram in order, Toby Gerhart, and then a very close third, Colt McCoy. All three of those guys were separated by less than 200 total points. Fourth, Ndamukong Suh. Fifth, senior year Tim Tebow. Sixth, CJ Spiller. 7, Kellen Moore. 8, Case Keenum. 9, I cannot believe this player received 2 first-place Heisman votes. Marty Gilliard.
Was it us? Did we vote?
Did I have a vote?
Did I just forget
as a high
that
school senior? Did I have a vote? I don't know. Yeah. Golden Tate finished 10th that year. What a field! Marty Gilliard pulling 2 first-place Heisman votes.
I loved Marty Gilliard. He was one of those guys I didn't understand why he didn't have NFL success.
Exactly.
And I was beyond the age where that was excusable, but I was still just nah, man. Marty Gilliard's got some juice. Him and Kobe Hamilton.
Yeah. Going into that draft, it was who do you got, Suh or Gilliard at number 1? Yeah. All right, let's get into the DFS slate. We'll start as always before we get into the positions. What are the games you're targeting this week?
So we got another, huge slate here, a ton of games, a ton of ways to attack this one. Some pretty interesting matchups in there, some pretty high overall totals. The highest one is Penn State going up against Maryland. Penn State, 24.5 point favorites in this one. So the expectation being that Penn State's going to hang north of 40 points in this one. So you got to like that. I imagine they will. I don't think Maryland's defense can stop anybody. They're terrible. Oklahoma seems to be rolling a little bit. They got Bramandre Stevenson back from suspension. They might get Trajan Bridges back from suspension as well. So they put up a pretty impressive offensive performance against Texas Tech last week. They get the Kansas matchup this week. So it's their week to destroy Kansas. Their implied total is 50. It's just a matter of how you can really attack it. This could be a week where I do like Spencer Rattler for once. I think that could work out well. Although the question always being how many points, how many throws is he going to need to make before Lincoln Riley empties the bench?
This is a comical money line of minus 20,000.
Sure. I'll sprinkle a little bit on Kansas there. What else we got? UNC Duke, I think, has a pretty, interesting setup. That one, 63.5 is the over-under in that one, with a much closer spread than say the Penn State, Maryland, or the Oklahoma, Kansas game. So that you could get some points on both sides of that one. TCU, Texas Tech, both of those teams have been really frustrating, but it still carries a pretty high over-under north of 60. In Minnesota, they have an implied total of 34.5, so they're pretty interesting this week going up against Illinois. Illinois seems to be pretty terrible once again. So those are the games that I think you can really take a look at. And then as far as the Pac-12, intro games, I like that Utah-Arizona one, and I like that USC-Arizona State one. I think that there's a lot to like on both sides of those games as well.
All right, so where are you looking at the quarterback position outside of Spencer Rattler if you do decide to go down that path?
So, yes, do like Rattler a fair bit. I understand the Sean Clifford love for this week because, he is going up against Maryland. They do have that high implied total. He does run a lot as well. I think he had 18 rushing attempts against Ohio State. I don't think he'll run quite as much, but I think he'll be a lot more effective on a per carry basis this week. So the problem is if you want to use him and Jahan Dotson, the wide receiver 1 for Penn State, who looks like a stud, you're sinking almost 17K of your salary cap into a passing game stack where the game might not be that competitive. So I do worry about pairing those two, but I do like getting individual pieces of Penn State for this game a fair bit, and I probably will just for the hell of it, one Clifford Dotson combo. Elsewhere, as far as the quarterback position, Keaton Slovis, again, the USC guy, really impressive last year. I remember us just being is this real? Every single Wednesday or Thursday, we would just check in. It's yeah, no, apparently it's still happening. He's still really good. Spencer Sanders, similar boat. He's healthy now. Looked pretty good last week. Had some turnovers though against Texas, but I like him a fair bit. And then a couple, potential inefficiencies from this board have to do with that Utah-Arizona game. So Jake Bentley, former South Carolina quarterback. We know that that Columbia to Salt Lake City pipeline. It's just that was the logical next step for him. Of
high-speed rail between those cities.
Absolutely. So yeah, I like him. 6,500 against Arizona. And then Grant Gunnell is a guy who's a very, very talented quarterback. Obviously was behind Khalil Tate last year, but he followed Sumlin to Arizona from A&M. He was a longtime A&M commit and was like a legit 4-star. So he really could be one of the best quarterbacks in the Pac-12 right now, and we just don't know it yet. He had one start against Oregon State last year and crushed it. And again, I would normally hesitate to use anyone against this Utah defense, but again, like Bill Connolly said, they are literally returning 27% of their defensive production from a year ago, which again ranks dead last in the nation. So I think this sets up reasonably well for the Arizona offense, especially if first game maybe Kevin Sumlin pulls out some tricks here. I think that Grant Gunnell at 5,900 could be not just a good way to save money, but a potential slate breaker, honestly.
So we have kind of a weird setup at the top at running back with Mohamed Ibrahim breaking 5 figures. He's at 10,000, and no one else is higher than 8,500. Is this a little bit of an overreaction to him carrying the ball 41 times for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns last week?
Yeah, that was and that was his revenge game, homecoming game, because he went to Good Counsel, which is like, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes from Maryland's campus. So he's got that out of the way. So we don't even have revenge game narrative to go with. Yeah, sinking 1/5 of your salary into one guy that's not going to catch passes, you need him to basically do what he did against Maryland, where he gets like the 35 plus carries, he gets the 200 yards, he gets you the multiple touchdowns. That's the only way that he really is able to smash value. And even for as bad as Illinois' defense has been, I think it'll put up a little bit more of a fight than Maryland's did. So I think it'll keep the roster percentage down, and I think it would be unwise to completely fade someone that is getting that amount of work and has been that explosive. But at the same time, like, you are going to have to get pretty creative with the way you fill out the rest of your lineup, because again, like, no quarterback even is $10K this week. So I mean, we're talking about the most expensive player on the board by $700. Like, it just doesn't feel like a great way to go about it. But that's the only piece of the Minnesota offense that you really need to have this week. As far as that goes.
Yeah, that's a little too expensive, I think, for my blood. Anything in the middle to lower tiers?
So if I am paying up at running back, I like Chuba Hubbard. He gets to go against Kansas State. Kansas State hasn't been great against the run this year, and Hubbard gets a ton of volume, so I like him a fair bit. Going back to that Maryland game, 5,900 for Devon Ford, I think, is totally reasonable. I think it might even be a value. I mean, we're talking about a Maryland defense that gives up so many yards on the ground, not just to Ibrahim, but to Northwestern as well. So I think this sets up really well for Ford. Again, 5,900. Bramandre Stevenson was a slate breaker last Saturday. Once he got off a suspension for Oklahoma, he was min-priced and just like dominated. So I like him a fair bit. You're not getting him at a discount. Maybe you could consider some of those cheaper Oklahoma running back options, be it TJ Pledger or Seth McGowan, because I think that there will be a point in this game, midway through the third quarter or so, where Oklahoma is cruising so hard that they go to like their secondary running backs, or maybe they want to give Stevenson a little bit more work because he had been rusty coming off the suspension. So either way, I love the Oklahoma run game this week. I'm not shattering the universe by saying that, but I do think it sets up pretty well for them. As far as Utah goes, they're replacing a ton of carries from Zach Moss, of course. Devin Brumfield, I think, is going to be the guy. Jordan Wilmore, another guy to consider there, but I think it's going to be Brumfield. I like both those guys. Both of them have reasonable price tags as well. So I think running back, I'm not going super expensive here. I'll probably have one of a Chuba Hubbard or an Ibrahim or maybe a Javonte Williams, but otherwise just kind of keeping it in the mid tier. And I think you can find some nice bargains at receiver though.
Yeah, and we have kind of a similar situation at the top at receiver with Jahan Dotson. Maybe a little bit of an overreaction to that big game against Ohio State last week. Close to 150 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's now the highest priced receiver on the slate in Week 10 at 8,300. You got Tylan Wallace just below him at 79. Bateman, maybe a chance to capitalize. He's a little bit lower, had a bit of a down game last week. I think he's $500 cheaper compared to Week 9. He's at 7. And then, the Pac-12 guys, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Equanimous' little brother, coming off that huge sophomore year. at USC. Obviously going to be their number one guy with Slovis. Is there a potential Slovis St. Brown pairing to be had?
I like that pairing a lot, actually, and you don't really need to break the bank to get there. And I think you can also, so St. Brown is probably my best play from like the sub 7K or just like from the Pac-12 guys. I love that call. So using him with Slovis would be wise. Drake London is another guy that we're pretty high on at RotoWire. Just like, I think he plays basketball for them too, or at least had a basketball scholarship from USC on top of the football one. Was really impressive last year as a freshman. Kind of has like Marcus Colston vibes to his game a little bit, just like an oversized jumbo receiver who can dominate in the air. So I really like him. One other guy, great name. You probably remember him from like last year, just like talking about crazy recruiting names, but like Brew McCoy started out at USC, goes to Texas. Now he's back at USC. He is very interesting. I don't really know the exact role that he'll be playing, but he's someone to keep in mind. Like if you need a near min-priced dart to throw, I think that USC is going to be putting up enough points and everything like that to where McCoy might work his way into it. And I think he's the type of dude that like only needs like one or two touches to really like hit value. He looks like he's looked like a man since he was like a sophomore in high school.
I feel like he should go by bruh. Just one man's opinion.
Brew's tight though. I mean,
it is. I mean, it's a win-win, but I feel like Brew was probably cooler throughout his life, and then the last couple of years with Bruh taking off, maybe you think about a conversion. Thoughts on Kyle Pitts this week, who has been by far the most dependable tight end in the country. Essentially functions as a receiver for them, and it's crazy. Like the volume for him hasn't even been all that high. I mean, he had that huge game against Ole Miss to begin the year with 4 touchdowns, like 52 DraftKings points, I think was that game. But the last 3 games, he's only had 14 total catches against Missouri, A&M, and South Carolina. He's still been, extremely efficient with those catches. The yardage totals haven't been insane, but he does have 3 touchdowns over those games. I think what's encouraging though is that the targets have been there. His conversion rate on those targets isn't great, but he's being targeted a little over, I think, 8 times per game in that span.
That's right. So yeah, I like the Pitts call. Like I was talking about earlier with Richard LeCount being out, I think that's a huge advantage for Florida up the seams. Kyle Pitts gave this defense a lot of trouble last year. I think that like if they kept going to him as opposed to like Van Jefferson or Grimes or someone like that, I think that maybe that game goes differently bottom line than it did. So I like Pitts a lot, and I think that the fact that like the buzz is off a little bit because there are so many other big name receivers in this slate, and I think that we don't have Kyle Pitts coming off of that nuclear 4 touchdown 170-yard game. So he's down at 6,200. He's gonna see 8 targets against a defense that doesn't, or a safety tandem that is less than full strength. I like Pitts a lot at 6,200. Yeah.
Give me your favorite bets of the week, if you don't mind, to finish this out.
Yes. I like Arkansas plus 1.5 at home. The home Hogs going up against Tennessee. I think that they, Tennessee, they have a quarterback problem, and until they get their quarterback problem figured out, they're going to be liable to lose to teams that aren't as good as them. And I think that Arkansas fits that mold. I think Sam Pittman crushed both of his hires with Bryles and with Barry Odom on the defensive side. They just are a well-coached team. I mean, that Georgia struggle against them in the first half doesn't feel nearly as embarrassing as it did back in September. So I like Arkansas as the home underdogs to win that one outright. If you're listening to this on Thursday, I like Wyoming -3 against Colorado State. Wyoming very good, even though they lost their starting quarterback very early on in the season. I think Levi Williams can make it happen. Xavier Valladay, really impressive running back. They're just going to play bully ball against Colorado State, and I don't think Colorado State can do anything about it. And I also like UNC -10.5 against Duke. I know that UNC coming off the loss against Virginia, but man, that's a good team still. It's still Sam Howell, and this is I don't think a very good Duke team. I mean, Duke took it to Syracuse once, but I'll take the UNC discount this week. I think that this game normally would be more like a 13.5. So 10.5 is totally fine.
UNC's had some weird games, and Virginia obviously being one of them, more so on the defensive end. Florida State, the offense struggled a little bit, but I mean, 3 of their last 4 games, you got totals of 41, 48, 56. So the offense is explosive, and you got a high total in this game as well. If the defense can just give you like a C+ game, I like where your head's at with that one.
Yeah, exactly. That's all you need. And Duke should be able to help that in its own right. I don't think Duke basically just has tempo on its side. They can run a ton of plays. They did it against Syracuse, but if they get knocked off of that, which I think UNC will be able to, they don't really have a ton of talent. So I think that UNC outmatches them pretty significantly there. And if this turns into a track meet, I don't think Duke has the horses to keep up. Whereas UNC, like you said, the offense has been clicking in recent weeks, so I like it a lot there.
All right, man. Well, Wisconsin notwithstanding, this should be another fun week. I'll be praying for you these next few nights in advance of, I guess, not really the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, but
I would hope not, at least for this year.
That would be something, yeah.
But it wouldn't shock me either.
No, at the same time, like maybe not the world's largest, but a large one nonetheless.
Yeah, but I mean, you and I both have had our experiences at that stadium. You being a Jags fan and me going down for that game a few times. Yeah, yep. Always a good time.
Yeah, Jags up. Tough week ahead for the Jags coming off the bye without Gardner Minshew.
Devastating. Right when that Van Gogh video comes out, and then he's hurt.
I know. The worst thing that could have happened was them beating the Colts week 1. The amount of hope that I had after that game, I mean, it went sharply.
I thought you were justified in it too. Yeah.
Everybody did. I know. And the Colts look great now. The Jags look terrible. They might finish 1-15. I don't know. I mean, the Texans are 1-6 as well, and I feel like they have a 0% chance of winning that game.
Yeah, it's rough right now. But the Jake Luton experience.
Yeah. Well, you're going through it too with the Ravens. I mean, I empathize.
Yeah, they're just. Last year was their chance. I don't know.
That's how I feel about 3 years ago with the Jags.
I don't want to have an existential crisis at the end of this video podcast, but I mean, this goes on any further, it'll happen.